2,300 years ago, Alexander the Great invaded Asia, his goal to conquer the Persian Empire. We followed in his footsteps, a 20,000-mile journey from Greece to the plains of India. By the 8th year of the war, Alexander had defeated the peoples of Central Asia. And now he turned towards India, heading for what he believed would be the end of the earth. Our journey now brought us from Afghanistan into the northwest frontier of Pakistan by the Khyber Pass. In the spring of 326 BC, astonished local people would have seen 60,000 Greeks tramping down these hills. We came down into Pakistan in the company of some British train spotters.
Not no tea.
Or beer.
I could really do with a British rail sandwich at this moment.
We can't do with a beer, never mind a sandwich.
They'd come to see the Khyber Railway, built under the British Empire. I was looking for traces of an older past, but the strategic importance of the Khyber has never changed since the dawn of history. It's always been the main invasion route into India, and the Macedonians crossed it that spring to enter an exotic and mysterious land. In those days, 1,000 years before the coming of Islam, Hindu India began at the Indus. That's where the name comes from. Indian people were a source of rumour and myth to the Greeks. They have the strangest customs on earth, the Greeks said. To Alexander, it must have been simply irresistible. We now followed his track up into the northwest frontier of Pakistan. You can imagine Alexander driving his troops over these passes. He's 29 now, no longer young. Tough, stocky, hard-bitten little man. His iron constitution not yet wrecked by the wounds, malaria, the drinking bouts, the sexual excess. As he came over these passes, he'll have remembered the words of his tutor Aristotle, who said that from this point, it ought to be possible to see the ends of the earth and the great ocean that the Greeks believed surrounded it. Well, Alexander now knew for sure that this was wrong, that vast and densely populated lands lay ahead, and he was driven to see them. The question now becomes not when's he going to stop, but how far can he go? Alexander planned the invasion of India as a two-pronged attack. The main army headed down through Peshawar to the Indus. Alexander himself cut north, perhaps to explore as much as to fight. And there we discovered a living connection with his story. These are the Kalash, the black pagans of the Hindu Kush, a tiny survival in a surrounding sea of Islam. They follow ancient gods and speak a language distantly akin to Greek. The people welcomed Alexander, and they told him an amazing story. They too were worshippers of the Greek god of ecstasy, Dionysus. Alexander had once again hit gold. From his mother's knee, Alexander had been told tales of Dionysus, how he'd been born far out to the east. Now the people took him to sacrifice on the very mountain where they said Dionysus had been born. To Alexander, it was an unmistakable sign. The god was here. Alexander joined them, wearing an ivy crown, drunk on their wine, dancing for the god, just as his mother used to do. And today the Kalash add another twist to the tale. They say some of the Greeks stayed on here under one of Alexander's generals, Shalak Shah. They married local women, and we, the Kalash, are their direct descendants. If the story was true, I drank wine that night with the descendants of Alexander's army. Alexander now marched on up the valley of the river Swat. In their thousands, refugees now fled in terror eastwards. They took shelter on a rock fortress high above the Indus Valley, a place the Greeks called Aionos. The rock was said to be impregnable. The Greeks were told that even Hercules had failed to take it when he wandered the earth on his 12 labours. It towered a mile above the river Indus. Its summit, a long curving ridge with enough cultivation to keep 1,000 men busy. Today it's called Pir Sar. There was only one path up which joined the mountain along the ridge from the west. On Pir Sar, Alexander would surpass even himself. We set out to climb Pir Sar in the Macedonians' footsteps. It's a wild region here, and the district officer gave us guides and armed police to drive off wolves and bandits.
Thank you very much.
The path was back-breaking. 5 miles along a narrow saddle, a tortuous trek which Alexander's men did at night with snow still in the gullies.
According to the Greeks, their advance guard was led by local guides up onto the rock, and they came on a secret path. And there's only one way that could be, it's this. It comes across this narrow neck of land, which is the only way you can get onto the rock. The ground, as you can see, falls away dramatically on either side, with huge crags on either side. So this must be the route that the Greeks took.
As the path got worse and worse, I found myself wondering why he'd bothered. Were the people on top such a threat to him? The only explanation I could come up with was what the Greeks called Alexander's pothos, his desire to surpass even the gods.
Have you seen Makin Khan?
By nightfall, we'd become separated.
Makin Khan!
Our guides were lost.
We're gonna stop here! It was pitch dark before we found somewhere to stay, an abandoned mosque used in summer by the shepherds. It's been an absolutely terrible walk. The terrain is just up and down, and even the donkeys could hardly make it. Much worse than crossing the Khawak Pass in the Hindu Kush, in fact. It almost made me believe that they couldn't have come this way. It's so difficult. You couldn't get an army through there. But if they did, if this was the way, then it is the most amazing demonstration of their absolute determination to overcome their enemies. To show the Indian people that there was nowhere to hide, and that all resistance would be futile. Next day, in a chill dawn, we looked down on the Indus from 8,000 feet. At 6 o'clock, after cold water and biscuits, we blearily prepared to carry on. It never ceased to amaze me how Alexander was able to inspire his men.
They must have been tough old birds, these Macedonians. That's all I can say. Nearly there. Come.
At nearly 9,000 feet, we reached the top of the ridge above Pirsar. To the north, the snow-capped peaks of the Karakoram. Alexander's men now discovered that a deep ravine lay between them and Pirsar itself, and unbelievable as it may seem, Alexander ordered his troops to bridge it.
There was about a 500-yard gap that the Greeks needed to bridge. And one tradition says it took 7 days and 7 nights with the soldiers working in relays. Each soldier had to cut 100 stakes, and the engineers presumably were digging big piles in the side of this space here, and they laid a mat of trees, earth and so on, and it rose higher and higher until maybe more than 100 feet above my head. It must have looked something like one of those trestle railway bridges that you see in the Wild West. And within the week, they'd built the causeway up enough to allow their catapults and artillery to concentrate on the Indian defenders, and then the fate of the rock was sealed.
The Indians tried to surrender, but Alexander swept along the ridge and massacred them or drove them off the cliffs. On top, he left an altar to Athena as goddess of victory. Looking out towards the roof of the world, Alexander could reflect he had surpassed even Hercules himself. Back on the Indus, Alexander's engineers had built a huge bridge of boats ready for the crossing. It must have taken them several days. By now the army was like a moving city. There were 64,000 infantry, 12,000 cavalry, camp followers, women, children, scientists, poets, even entertainers. And the surveyors who were still measuring every step from Greece to the end of the earth. And that was getting closer every day. Alexander paused briefly at the ancient city of Taxila on the Grand Trunk Road. Here a Greek city grew up, the first in the subcontinent. A city of neat lines, a place of colonists, set apart from the hubbub of the native town next door.
For centuries after, Greek was spoken in these streets just as English is now. In the bazaars you can still find the coins of Alexander's successors, Greek Maharajas lauding it in a Greek Raj.
Ah, this is Greek. Yes, Eucratides the Great. Where did the coin come from? Does he know?
And on their coins the heirs of Alexander proudly sport the cavalry hat and scarf of Alexander's crack units, with all the swagger of fighter aces, the viciously valiant Greeks, as the Indians called them. So began the meeting of two of the great civilizations in history. Alexander too was shown with the headdress of elephant hide, conqueror of India. That was his ambition now. He marched on south, towards the Great Salt Range. Long before the Grand Trunk Road, this was the ancient route into India. When you come over the Great Salt Range, suddenly a wonderful view opens up. The Jhelum River, the first of the 5 great rivers of the Punjab, and beyond the plains of India stretching away as far as the Ganges itself, the heartland of Indian civilization. For the Greek troops and their leadership, it must have been an extraordinary moment after all the thousands of miles that they'd travelled. And from now on, they'd be marching into the unknown. Across the Jhelum, the local Indian Raja, Porus, had massed a powerful army with 200 war elephants. He was determined to stop Alexander crossing. Somehow, Alexander had to get his forces over in secret. The Greeks said he did it where a spur of the Salt Range comes down to the river plain to form a headland. I went looking for it at the little village of Jalalpur. And there, I met the general.
General Shafkat.
How are
Michael
you?
Wood.
Nice to meet you, sir.
Very nice to meet you. And what a wonderful place this is.
General Shafkat's family owns the shrine here. A veteran of latter-day campaigns, he'd lectured on Alexander at Staff College, and he'd got it all worked out.
Where we attacked from, and the battlefield is right in front of you.
This is the battlefield right here.
Across the river.
Why are you so sure?
Well, if you go through the Greek historians, they mention there's a headland from the main range of the hills. And this is the only place where we have the headland, and we're standing right on top of that one. And on the far side, according to the historian, there was a ravine where he had his cavalry and the other forces during the day and the night, and crossed it across to the island, which still exists. And this, as a matter of fact, out of this whole range of hills, this is the only place where he could have crossed.
Wonderful, wonderful.
The general offered to show us how Alexander did it.
They're bringing punt poles over there, aren't they? Yeah. There's another boat.
Alexander's plan was to hold Porus in front of him and then to cross higher upstream, a flanking move repeated through history, down to the Napoleonic Wars and Desert Storm.
Now, that is a classic movement of encircling or outflanking move, where you have either both flanks or the center lean across the enemy's major force and attract their attention. And show as if they were going to cross, or keep them amused in general terms, and go around and on a flanking movement and hit him either on the flank or at the back. Well, Napoleon tried it again and again. Austerlitz is one of the most classical examples.
We took a small force of cavalry in the boats. Our infantry crossed on bales of straw, just as the Greeks did. According to the historian Arrian, Alexander also had some prefabricated boats.
Alexander went in a 30-oared boat, so they've got quite a number of them, yeah. They could probably take a lot of troops. But the cavalry, he says, came across on rafts that they'd made and prepared beforehand, stuffed with...
They must be with planks on top, stuffed with straw, local brush and things. We make them in a different manner, only to take the infantry across, not the horses.
What, you still use them in the army in our time?
Yes, we do. During World War II, Irrawaddy and Burma campaign, most of the troops always crossed on these rafts.
Amazing. Good. The general decided I was so woefully ignorant of military matters, I should get first-hand experience of what Alexander's men went through.
With this kind of stuff.
This has been going on on the Burma front during World War II.
Yeah.
Most of the crossings were done on this thing at night.
Yeah.
Alexander had done it before, of course, but remember, this time it was at night, pitch dark, pouring rain and rising flood waters.
Up to you.
No? Is that far enough?
Alexander used tents made of sewn animal skins, which were watertight. We had an old tarpaulin, and just before we reached the deep channel,
You should have gone first, the middle one and the two others climb simultaneously on both sides. Otherwise you will tilt it and get water abroad.
the battle took place near the little village of Sikandarpur. Surrounded and surprised, Porus had little chance against one of the hardest armies which has ever existed. It was a horrible scene, the rain, the churned-up rice paddies, the Macedonians jabbing their long spears into the elephants' eyes. The elephants were maddened by their suffering, says Arrian, trampling friend and foe alike. Porus's army was wiped out and he surrendered. But Alexander was so impressed by his bravery that he gave him his kingdom back, and Porus became his ally. The march restarted around midsummer, right in the middle of the monsoon rains. It must have been the last straw for the Greek troops, the wet, the muggy heat, the mosquitoes. As any old India hand will tell you, during the rains nothing ever gets dry, your gear and weapons rust, clothes rot, wounds don't heal. And there was no end to the fighting. Casualties mounted remorselessly. We followed Alexander by road and entered today's India north of the Sikh holy city of Amritsar. Nearby we picked up 2 taxis to take us on to Alexander's appointment with destiny by the banks of the river Bias. In early September, Alexander reached the Bias, at the crossing place of one of the ancient routes through North India. As he stared out across the river, Alexander still thought the end of the earth was near. His teacher Aristotle had taught him India was a short peninsula jutting into the great ocean which circled the earth. As far as he knew, they didn't have far to go. But here at the Bias, when Alexander questioned local people about the road ahead, new and unexpected information came into his hands. The end of the earth was not near. 2 or 3 weeks' march from the Bias was a far bigger river, the Ganges, and a great kingdom with a vast army and thousands of war elephants.
How far is it? How many kilometers is it from here to Delhi? 500.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Long distance.
Yeah. The Greek army could do about 30 kilometers a day, so well, they could do that in 3 weeks, couldn't they?
It opens in October
Looking out across the river, Alexander, of course, was all for pushing on. But now, after 8 years and 17,000 miles, the troops had reached breaking point. The king urged them to one last great effort, but he was greeted with silence.
No one dared speak. They were too frightened. And then one of the senior commanders, Coenus, plucked up the courage. "Sir, you said you would never lead us as a dictator," he began, rather daringly. "You always said you were open to persuasion. Well, let me speak now, not on our behalf, but on behalf of the ordinary rank and file of the army. Most of the men who came out with us from Greece have left their bones out there on the roads of Asia. And those that remain are battered in body and weary in spirit. Just look at them, their gear's ruined, they're wearing patched-up Indian clothes. They've had enough. Sir, under your leadership, our achievements have been simply wonderful. But the will of the gods can't forever be taken for granted. Surely the time has come now to set a limit to our endeavors."
The king had reached the moment on which his life would turn. It's been a subject of legend ever since. It's even in the Hindi movies. The king was beside himself with fury. For 3 days he sulked in his tent. Then, seeing the army's mood, Alexander asked the gods for a sign. The army waited on tenterhooks. The omens were bad. Alexander accepted the will of the gods and agreed to turn back. And what if they'd gone on? To the Ganges, China even. The whole of history might have been different. But it was not to be. Before he turned back, he made altars to the gods who'd brought him so far. Dionysus, Apollo, Hercules. And an inscription. Alexander stopped here. Back on the Jhelum River, he'd ordered a fleet to be built, ready to journey down the Indus to the ocean. 1,000 vessels all told. They included Greek galleys. The last of the old master boat builders on the Indus chuckled at the idea. These Greek warships, he said, would never cope with the Indus. He sketched a few modifications to Alexander's naval plans. Flat bottoms, he said. That's what's needed.
So, if they were going to build a fleet like this, in 6 months they had to build a fleet like this, they would need a very big workforce.
It's not possible.
Not possible, but Alexander did it. He set sail mid-November, the main army marching with him along the riverbank. They cast off to the sound of bands and were watched by the Indians, who followed for a while in amazement. With the army now were thousands of women and children, Indians, Bactrians, Central Asians, all captives of war. Among them was Alexander's teenage wife, Roxane. That autumn,
Roxane gave birth to a baby boy. The king had finally produced an heir. But the child died and was buried by the banks of the Jhelum. How did Alexander feel? Did he see this as a sign? All we know is that he plunged himself back into war. The journey down the Indus took 7 months. It led them through great kingdoms and past ancient cities. Everywhere in today's Pakistan, Alexander met resistance, whose ferocity perplexed him.
It's with the journey down the Indus that the whole tenor of the expedition seems to change. The Greeks had been through heavily populated countries before, like Iraq and Egypt, but the people hadn't resisted. Here they did. And now we start to get the first reports of atrocities and the large-scale massacre of civilians.
In the new year, he attacked a big city in the lower Punjab. The city of a people called the Malyans, today's Multan. The city was then, as it still is, surrounded by high walls of brick, walls which had been assaulted many times since Alexander's day, the last being the British siege of 1849. Local legend says Alexander's siege broke through at a place called the Tower of Blood.
Basically, the Greek troops are outside the walls. I mean, it can't have been exactly this spot, but this is as good a place to tell the story as any. Alexander thought the troops were slacking. He put a siege ladder against the wall, and he went up himself, led the troops. Behind him were only three men, 2 of his bodyguard, one of them holding the sacred shield from Troy, and another an NCO, Avreas. And Alexander held his shield above him, and up he went. And here's the Macedonian siege ladder itself. Yeah. The Macedonian siege ladders were as wobbly as this one.
As they reached the top, the weight of the troops behind broke the ladder, leaving the 4 men on their own.
Salam! It's alright, I'm only a Macedonian soldier. When Alexander got onto the top, he crouched on the top of the wall, says Arian, behind his shield. The other 3 men came up with him. And then, at that moment, surrounded by Indian defenders, exposed on the wall, he took his life into his own hands and leapt into the fortress rather than outside, leaving the rest of the army behind. Then the Indian defenders closed in on him, and he was forced to throw stones at them, beat them off with his sword and so on. The rest of the army behind, panic-stricken, tried to find a way of getting into the city, while the 4 men desperately defended themselves. The NCO Avreas was hit by an arrow in the face and killed, and then Alexander himself was struck by an arrow that went in the open bit underneath his armour straight into his lung. He collapsed on the floor, bleeding profusely, and the bodyguard Pevkestas straddled him, holding the sacred shield from Troy and trying to beat off the Indian attackers. You can imagine the paramedics rushing Alexander back to the camp. Meanwhile, Panic spread through the army. They feared that with Alexander dead, they'd never see home again.
They went berserk and massacred everyone in the city. Alexander's surgeon prepared to operate. Critobulus of Kos had been his father's doctor. He'd once taken an arrow from King Philip's eye. Over the years, Alexander had taken punishment which would have stopped an ox. Leg and thigh wounds, a catapult bolt in the shoulder, 21 wounds in all. This, though, was the most serious. His lung was pierced. The story here is that the arrow was poisoned and that Alexander never really recovered. Now, the Greek historians don't mention this, but the traditional doctors here, the Hakims, claim descent from Alexander's doctors. They practice what they call Greek medicine, so perhaps they should know. But poison or not, both doctor and patient knew that Alexander was very close to death. For a week, Alexander's life hung in the balance. Then they gently floated him along the river so the army could see he was alive. They cried with relief. They still loved him. The journey down the Indus took from November until the next summer, fighting all the way. Alexander founded another Alexandria at the confluence of the rivers. In July, he reached the Indus Delta. His fleet explored the arms of the Indus, and its journey has been pieced together by Monique Quevran. We drove across the bay where Alexander coasted that summer. All this plain was sea then, but it's silted now, leaving the islands high and dry.
Of the wall, so you see the dimension.
Yeah.
Dimension. Maybe you want to see the position of this tower.
Ah.
Alexander's admiral Nearchus says he built fortifications at a place he called Alexander's Harbour.
Tower where the soldiers.
They were here on this spot.
Yes, that is clearly written in the ancient text. And they survive eating oysters.
Arian mentions this.
Yes, oysters and mussels and of a very big size.
Yeah. So it is possible then that these are left by the Greek soldiers during their stay here.
I let you tell it, but I believe.
The oysters couldn't be from Islamic times because eating shellfish is against the Muslim religion. Most likely it was Alexander's Greeks who left these shells.
And they were very happy after, from so long time they have left their country to have oysters, seafood.
Alexander's last act in India was to build altars, just as he'd done in Central Asia and the Punjab. He put them on a tiny island in the sea. It's never been found, but in the middle of the Delta Plain is another long-forgotten island, the last before the open sea. This was perhaps Alexander's last landfall in India. Perhaps he stood on this spot, staring out to sea, as his fleet set sail for the Gulf, following the line of the setting sun. Alexander planned his return from India as a combined operation by land and sea. And with the help of the Pakistan Navy, we tried to trace his fleet's progress. along the bleak coast of the Makran. The logbook of Alexander's Admiral Nearchus survives, an eyewitness we could still follow after 2,000 years.
Now, the Greek logbook of the expedition, he actually mentions a number of places. For instance, they went round a great promontory or a cape which stuck far out into the sea and was very high and precipitous.
This is the Ras Urmara. It's a big mountain here. It's about 1,400 feet high.
Wow.
It's 1,400 feet high. It's a big mountain and it's sticking out in sea.
There's one other kind of little story that he tells in this, which is particularly interesting. He says that about 10 miles off the shore, maybe roughly, there was an island. And it was uninhabited. They said no human being ever went there. In fact, it was something of a kind of ill-omened place.
This is right in front of you. Is Astola Island.
Yeah.
You know, on a bigger chart you can see.
Yeah.
This Astola Island is uninhabited and it's a good
see
landmark.
The distance, yes, my divider is open 10 miles.
So
and if you see from Astola, the land is about 12 miles today.
It's roughly right.
So water must have receded 2 miles.
It says the Greeks were frightened of the stories about this island, that you shouldn't step on it, and in fact they sailed round the island shouting to check that there weren't kind of spirits before they stepped on it.
In my 20 years naval career, we have never been there. So we can't.
In October, Alexander began his return journey with the land army, 100,000 strong now, with tens of thousands of camp followers. And we followed into the dreaded Makran desert. This part of the Makran is known for great flash floods in the autumn, the time Alexander came through. The local Baluchis told us whole villages can be swept away. And this is what happened to Alexander. One night the army camped in a stream bed and a flash flood killed many people. Worse was to follow. Alexander's route led him to Turbat, an ancient fortress on the road to Iran. He must have stayed here.
Is all the Islamic cities?
Yes, all this part.
Yeah.
It's a rich and fertile oasis.
Wow, what a view.
Yes, you can see the Zikri wall there.
From Turbat, the main route to Iran goes straight as a die westwards up the Ketch Valley. But Alexander didn't take it. He now turned off the main route and headed south for the sea. It's only 100 miles, but it goes through the harshest terrain. The Greeks found impoverished settlements of aboriginal people they called the fish eaters, too poor to give them supplies.
Oh, God. We've been on this road now for 10 hours. We've had half a litre of water and 2 oranges each. I don't think we took the preparations for this leg of the trip as seriously as we should have done. But then I don't think Alexander the Great did either. In fact, coming this way makes me think it was a crazy notion to bring an army through here. The last big spring is 50 kilometres back. The Greeks, you can be sure, were in trouble before they even hit the sea.
At the sea, there was no sign of the fleet, only the boats of the fish eaters. Alexander should have gone back now the way he'd come. But that wasn't his way. He decided to push on, sticking to the coast. Perhaps he was hoping to establish ports to link his empire. Perhaps he still hoped to meet the fleet. We don't know. From here, the only way to follow him was by camel.
Check this. An outsider will die on this route, yeah? Is that right?
An outsider will die. Yeah.
God,
Won't be able to find anyone.
Oh, great. That's extremely comforting to know. Is there water on the route? Are there actually spring water holes along the route, or do we have to carry the water?
He says that there's very few water springs.
Oh, that's great.
If I go, I can't find those.
We better take somebody with us who can. Then.
And so we left the burning shore by the great rock of Pasni, in the footsteps of Alexander's last epic march. The journey for Alexander's army soon became a nightmare.
Greeks came into an area of great hills of sand, and then Arrian says their feet sank in like treading into untrodden snow, and the horses and the mules just couldn't cope with that at all because they didn't have camels as we do. And sometimes Arrian says they had to go through the whole night without water, and in the morning they'd be leaving people behind who were sick or ill or just too tired or absolutely dying of thirst. And of course, those people were never seen again. They were lost, says Arrian, like people fallen overboard and lost at sea.
Now, for the first time in his life, he was staring at defeat.
Why did he come here to the Makran? I just don't know. He was trying to get back to Iran, I guess. But why he came here to this coast, I don't understand. I don't understand.
Alexander became greatly distressed because they were travelling through such awful terrain, says the geographer Strabo. According to one source, only a quarter of the army survived. The truth will never be known, but even though he was in such desperate straits, Alexander still showed flashes of his old self.
Alexander was leading the army on foot, as he often did, to encourage the troops, and everybody was absolutely desperate for thirst. And some soldiers found a tiny bit of water in a dried-up stream bed and brought it to him just in a helmet. And in front of the whole army, he poured it away into the sand. If they couldn't drink, then he wouldn't. The Greeks always cited this story as being proof of his noble character. Personally, I find it a little frightening that after all that he'd put them through, they could still be won over by his tricks.
But the truth is, they still loved him and still needed his leadership to pull them through. And he still needed them in order to be Alexander.
Out here you really do wonder why on earth
he brought his army through this appalling wilderness. Almost makes you wonder whether he wanted to punish them for what happened to the Bias River, for not following him to the ends of the earth. But among the Greeks, the most popular explanation was this: simply that it was there. He'd been told the journey was impossible for an army, and because of his inner demon, he just had to do it. He had to excel everybody. He had to do what nobody else had done. And of course, in the past, his gambles had always paid off. It took him 60 days to get through the Makran. In the spring, he arrived back in Persepolis, from where he'd set off east 7 years before. He walked through the burned palace of the Persian kings, destroyed at his orders. And with hindsight, he regretted what he'd done. After all, he was the king now. He was now wearing the robes and tiara of the Persian Shah. He could no longer be a mere conqueror, a seeker after glory. Now he had to rule the biggest empire the world had ever seen. And Iran was now the center of his universe. He still had great plans, among them to conquer the West. But fate, or the will of the gods, was closing in. There, suddenly, after a massive binge, his dearest friend and lover, Hephaestion, died. Alexander was almost suicidal in his grief. "Others loved me because I was king," he said. "Hephaestion loved me for myself." The bazaars were rife with rumour. Some spoke of poison, that the king too did not have long to live, that the omens were against him, that he'd lost his sense of purpose. The legend is still told by the traditional tale-tellers in Iran.
تمام دنیا زیر نگین اسکندر آمد، اما یه رو اسکندر اومد جلوی آینه هم چی کنه؟ دید موها سپید. یه روز اسکندر دید حالش داره منقلب میشه.
That last spring, he moved back into Iraq. Now, obsessed with every omen, the king dithered while his soothsayers argued over the flight of birds. The signs, they said, were plain. He must not enter Babylon. Till now, he'd never ignored the gods, but now he did. By the banks of the Euphrates, after another heavy drinking session, the king fell ill. The wounds, alcohol, grief had finally taken their toll. Imagine the claustrophobia of the palace, the hanging gardens with their forest of palms, the somnolent heat of the river. There's a diary of those last days. It's one of the most dramatic records in history. This is the account of the king's last days. It comes almost word for word from the royal diaries. On the 29th of May, he slept in the bathroom because he was feverish. He spent the next day playing dice. 31st, he bathed and lay down in the bathroom, listening to Nearchus tell the story of the return of the fleet from India. On the 1st of June, the fever grew more intense. He had a bad night, and all through the next day, his fever was very high. 5th of June, they moved him to the other side of the river. There he slept a little, but the fever did not abate. The Macedonian veterans now believed he was dead and pushed their way into the palace to see him a last time. The motive in almost every heart was grief and a sort of helpless bewilderment at the thought of losing him. Lying speechless as the men filed by, he still struggled to raise his head, and with his eyes gave a look of recognition to each individual as he went past. On the 10th of June, towards evening, he died.
O Vasiles Alexandros, όλον τον κόσμο κέρδισε και την ψυχή του έχασε.
After 20,000 miles, our journey was over. It ended where it began, in the shadow of Mount Olympus, the home of the gods. Alexander's search for eternal glory was cut short, and ever since he's carried the weight of an unfulfilled destiny, the hero who flew too close to the sun and whose wings were burned. But today the verdict of history is harsher. A man broken in the end by the loneliness and insanity of absolute power.
Is that how we should see Alexander's career now? As a self-destructive madness rather than everlasting glory? I'll tell you what I think, for what it's worth, having followed in his footsteps for this far. And that is that all the evils unleashed by men of war in our own time teach us that we should reject Alexander's ideals. But Alexander was a man of his time, not of ours. He believed in the gods, and he would have accepted their verdicts, both for good and ill. If he could answer us here now, I'm sure he would say, like the tragic hero that he is, "Let the gods be my judges, for in every sign that they gave me, they told me no lies."
Σε παράγγειλα στην Μακεδονία. Το λαμπερό σου πρόσωπο να γράψουν ιστορία. Ο Βασίλης Αλεξανδρός.